As I was watching Matt Reeves' The Batman, I was struck by the myriad similarities between the antagonist of the film, the Riddler, played by the talented Paul Dano, and the antagonist of another film, that being Heath Ledger's legendary Oscar-winning portrayal of the Joker in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. This led me to compare the movies as a whole, and I initially thought of The Batman as a lesser version of The Dark Knight. But is that even a fair comparison? That is to say, there are probably as many similarities as there are differences between the two characters, some of which raise the question of inspiration and influence. Was the Riddler in The Batman informed by the Joker in The Dark Knight, or was his character drawn from Riddler's source material, as well as various psychopaths throughout modern history? Now, I don't have the answers to these questions. To be honest, I'm not a comic book expert, but I do like stories, and I think something can be learned about the stories in analyzing these two characters side by side. Keep in mind, this is a spoiler analysis. I will be discussing story details of the new Batman movie. Leave now, and return after you've watched the film, if you don't want anything spoiled for your initial viewing. When it comes to comparing these two characters, there are multiple dimensions to survey. There's the character themselves, the performance of the actor, and the character's context within the greater story, all of which are woven into a single, final product, what we see on the screen, or in our minds when reading a good script or a book. I will do my best not to refer to Paul Dano or Heath Ledger in this section, and instead inspect the characters they played. The Riddler has his own prologue in The Batman. The first shot is seen through his eyes, possibly through the eyes of one of his accomplices. More on that later. We see him murder the mayor on Halloween night in a somewhat strange, unrefined, even untamed fashion, as though it was the Riddler's first murder. Then we see the duct tape pulled out, and in the following scene, a police investigation involving Batman himself. We witness the meticulous quality and absolute intentionality of the murder. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment killing. It was calculated, and instead of mistakenly leaving clues, the Riddler purposefully left clues, riddles, for the Batman to solve and follow. Forgive me for a bit of paraphrasing, but I think it's pertinent, as the Riddler essentially repeats this over the course of the movie. He methodically kills people he deems corrupt, and leaves clues for Batman to follow. The Riddler destroys by the guidance of his misguided morality. Notably, he nihilistically destroys, and doesn't really have a solution for what comes after the destruction. This will be very important in regards to his relationship to Batman. Compare this to the antagonist of The Dark Knight. The Joker also has a prologue, a very intense one. It masterfully establishes the careful chaos of the Joker, his manipulation of others, as well as crime families, and, with a single line, who his character is. What doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger. Again, this is a prologue highlighting the antagonist character's behavior, which will continually exhibit itself in new scenarios throughout the movie. The Joker murders people, coerces others into his service, and sows general chaos. He's also obsessed with Batman, in the pursuit of breaking him as a character, through revealing his identity, or by making Batman kill him, breaking the Caped Crusader's cardinal role. His pursuit is destruction, for the sake of chaos. This will not only affect Batman, but also the city of Gotham, and its hopes, incarnated as Harvey Dent. Both characters are monstrous killers who've manipulated others to their cause. They're not physically powerful, like Bane or Deathstroke, but they twist threads behind the scenes. They seemingly taunt their opposition. I found it interesting that there was a shaky camera scene in both movies, where both antagonists were recording a tortured captive, along with a message they wanted to tell the world. It may seem like the Batman took a page from The Dark Knight here, and I still hold this opinion, but it's not as though Christopher Nolan invented the idea of a shaky camera torture scene. They've existed in other media, and in real life, long before The Dark Knight. However, I think it's fair to say that the Joker's shaky camera scene, and overall portrayal, was so scary, so visceral for a comic book movie, that it opened the doors for more gritty, monstrously real characters like the Riddler in The Batman and other superhero films to come. The biggest difference in the isolated character of these antagonists is their backstories. The Riddler has a past that is integrated with the setting of Gotham and even the Wayne family. He's an orphan who was forgotten about during the Renewal Project, mistreated in his youth, and developed a pessimistic, nihilistic view on life because of his experiences. His path informs, and in his own belief justifies, his current behavior. And it is a behavior which he shares with some of the other downtrodden individuals in Gotham. The Joker, on the other hand, possesses no clear past. He tells different backstories as to how he got the smile on his face, which makes him only more chaotic and threatening. No one knows his real name, or his personal history. There is only speculation. A common theory is that he was an American soldier who fought in the Middle East, revealed possibly in his conversation with Harvey Dent in the hospital, that would also explain his knowledge of firearms, such as the RPG in the car chase scene. Again, that is only speculation, and no clear backstory is offered. In The Dark Knight, the Joker is more of a personification of chaos than a mere character resembling a broken man. No reasoning is needed for his current, villainous behavior, because a true representation of chaos and meaningless destruction needs no reasoning for its ways. He is the antithesis of reason, a destroyer and a corrupter. In this way, the Joker seems perhaps much less realistic than the Riddler, who has a clear, more understandable, and even possibly sympathetic trace between his motivations and actions. The Riddler may seem more human, but in terms of theater and storytelling, the Joker is a more pure representation of the same general destructive archetype that both characters were striving to be, the man who destroys without a thought of what comes after. It seems like a late disclaimer to say that both Heath Ledger and Paul Dano gave phenomenal performances for their respective roles. It's been said a million times, but Heath Ledger as the Joker was as incredible as it was surprising. Many doubted the actor's capability in bringing one of the most famous comic book villains to life. Heath Ledger delivered all the goods. His performance was horrifying. The makeup he applied himself was full of character. The way he walked, the way he laughed, it's all iconic. His performance spawned millions of meme gifs and images, if that's any indicator of what long-lasting effect it had on the audience. Every subsequent superhero psychological movie villain will look to Heath Ledger's Joker for deserved inspiration. Paul Dano pulled off a simultaneously manipulative, but also extremely vulnerable person. I will say it again, Ledger's Joker felt more like chaos incarnate, a demigod, rather than a man who could be stopped, which functioned for what he was. Paul Dano played a much more realistic character. When I say realistic, I mean that you can imagine your next-door neighbor being the Riddler, a competent, morally twisted psychopath who leads a domestic terrorist group online after his 9-to-5. Joker, while horrifying in his representation of chaos, feels like he's more than a man. It's hard to imagine him as somebody who lives in your neighborhood. His operations were almost always large-scale, with big stakes. For the most part, the Riddler was just a careful murderer with like-minded people helping him. Whereas I like the Joker's immutability as a chaotic corrupter, I loved seeing the Riddler break down when he realized that the Batman wasn't on his side in the murders. The Riddler had such a twisted perception of reality that he believed he was working with the Batman and bringing mobsters to light in Gotham. And Paul Dano played that wonderfully, even if it did remind me of his reverend character from There Will Be Blood, who was also simultaneously powerful and vulnerable. Point being, if you need somebody for a role who looks like your quiet, innocent neighbor, who is actually a twisted mass murderer, call it Paul Dano. The casting in both movies was perfect. This is where it gets complex. A narrative's antagonist is only as good as how reasonable and necessary it is for that antagonist to exist within the narrative. Allow me to explain. If you change any quality about Darth Vader, all of Star Wars falls apart. He's pretty much a perfect villain in every sense of how he fits into the greater Star Wars story. He caused the rise of the Empire, but he was also destined to bring it down. In terms of thematic quality, his relationship with Luke and Luke's journey is closely tied with powerful stories of ancient mythology. Darth Vader doesn't just have robot limbs to seem cool and powerful. It's to represent how mutilated he's become, how much pain he's in, how he's become less of a man, less of a human, in his pursuit of the dark side of the Force. Somebody like Griffith from Berserk makes total sense in context of the story and the world. He's been influenced by its brutality, masks it with extreme confidence, and when that confidence is broken, he unleashes literal hell on the world. Every aspect of his character, from his armor design to his mannerisms, makes this not only evident, but also unchangeable. If you made Griffith an old man, his youthful arrogance and compulsive behavior, despite his martial competency, wouldn't make as much sense. He also plays an excellent foil to Guts, as Darth Vader plays a perfect foil to Luke, as every excellent villain should play a direct foil to the protagonist, and even the world. That's what makes them the bad guy. So, how should we weigh the Joker of The Dark Knight and the Riddler of the Batman in respect to their connection to the protagonist, setting, plot, and themes of the story? How are they similar and different? Firstly, I would just like to state that the Joker was far more present in The Dark Knight than the Riddler was in the Batman, both physically and in his shadow of influence. The Joker has many scenes written around him, displaying his own movements and actions, with him largely at the center of the action. He has multiple direct interactions with the Batman, including the street stare down, the interrogation scene, and the final capture scene. He's in the movie a lot, and it makes sense, as his larger-than-life personality demands focus to believably ingrain him into the story. And when the Joker isn't physically present, just about everyone is talking about him, worrying about his next move. The Joker murders Rachel, an actually prominent character in the Dark Knight trilogy. He corrupts Harvey Dent, setting up the powerful epilogue of the movie. Everything he does has consequences in every dimension of the plot. On the other hand, the Riddler, while he does orchestrate multiple high-level murders and a huge domestic terrorist attack, isn't really as present in the Batman. For a solid hour in the middle of the movie, almost all consideration of the Riddler is forgotten about, as the Bruce Wayne / mob movie / family history uncovering narrative takes over. It still works in my opinion, but the Riddler feels a little too forgotten about. His shadow is still there, I suppose, with the mystery and the riddles, but it isn't as tense, as demanding of immediate action as the Joker's threat is. There's just one scene with the Batman and Riddler somewhat in the same room, and it's a well-written, tense scene where the audience thinks the Riddler might have the scoop on Batman's identity. This is where I'm going to explore a quick but important tangent. The loss of focus on the Riddler is symptomatic of how the writers of the Batman pulled too many punches. Whereas the Joker kills Rachel, the Riddler drops an explosive care package at Wayne Manor. Here the audience may think, no way they're going to kill Alfred. He's played by Andy Serkis, and this might be the first movie of many featuring Robert Pattinson and his trusty butler. And they would be right. Alfred survives with some minor wounds, and the sole effect it has is tightening Bruce Wayne's appreciation of Alfred as family. It allows for a heartfelt one-on-one conversation, I suppose, and sure it might change Bruce Wayne's self-isolated demeanor somehow, but that's about it. It would have really been gutsy if Alfred died, and Bruce Wayne still chose to become a better person despite that. It's not unforgivable though. Tracking back to the scene between Batman and the Riddler, we have a very tense moment, perhaps the most tense in the entire movie, where the Riddler keeps repeating, "Bruce Wayne, Bruce Wayne, Bruce Wayne," and Batman thinks he's discovered his secret identity. And again, the audience might be thinking, whoa, the Riddler is competent. He figured out Batman's identity, but what will the consequences be? What will Batman do to protect his secret? And they really wouldn't have to be worried about it, since it's quickly revealed that the Riddler doesn't actually know Batman's identity. He was just repeating the name Bruce Wayne because of recent circumstances and a personal grudge against the Wayne family, which I think is fine, but perhaps a little too coincidental in its release of tension from the scene. But the tension here is also created by coincidence as much as it is relieved, so I'm split. I think it's a worthy scene, perhaps better for the Riddler's ignorance of Batman's identity, which, truthfully, the Riddler really showed no interest in discovering throughout the movie. He sees Batman as a partner in uncovering the corrupt mob, so why would he try to investigate the vigilante's identity? In any case, it still feels like a pulled punch to me. The last example on this tangent will actually lead into my next point of interest, that being the epilogue of both films, both set into motion by the antagonist. The Riddler's explosive flooding of Gotham, paired with the assassination attempts conducted by his look-alike fellow domestic terrorists, feels like less than what it could have been. I would say that I enjoyed the final fight scene choreography and Batman's change of heart from vengeance into savior, symbolized in him freeing and leading the people out of the water wreckage by the light of his red flare, perhaps metaphorical for some kind of baptism, Batman rising from the water, transformed, but I digress. It worked for Batman as a character, but there are very few consequences in this scene. The worst moment is when the new mayor gets shot, and then recovers minutes later as though nothing ever happened. That's definitely a pulled punch. In general, the Riddler terrorists are stopped at no expense, and at no sacrifice except for 5 minutes of screen time dedicated to beating some baddies up. It kind of feels like the producers wanted a fight scene at the end, and the writers were forced to oblige. There's even a strange sequence where Batman gets shot by a double-barrel shotgun, and then Catwoman saves him, and then she gets in trouble, and then he injects himself with some kind of adrenaline and saves her. All of this kind of feels pretty unnecessary. This final fight scene quickly lost all tension, and left nothing but an appreciation of Batman's fighting skills in my memory. Not the worst case scenario. Now, compare that to the epilogue of The Dark Knight, where Batman must contend with a similar but much smaller scale situation. Harvey Dent has been corrupted by the Joker. Even Gotham's White Knight can be brought low, and Batman has to stop him from killing Commissioner Gordon's son. This scene is wrought with suspense, as we know as an audience, from witnessing Rachel's death, that this narrative will pull no punches. The audience knows that the Joker's actions, as a force of chaos, have consequences. The bad guy, here it's Two-Face, is stopped, but there is a heavy cost. Batman essentially breaks his own rule, indirectly killing Harvey Dent to save Gordon's son. Then, Batman and Gordon agree to lie to the public, villainizing Batman as Harvey Dent's murderer so that they can maintain Harvey Dent as a symbol of hope to Gotham. It's a little scene with huge thematic implications, unlike the end of The Batman, a huge scene with little thematic implications. Here, Batman makes multiple sacrifices to do the moral good, and it's difficult. Side note, it's interesting that Batman becomes a villain at the end of this movie to the public, and in The Batman, he becomes a hero to the public. Another interesting parallel. The ending of The Dark Knight pulls no punches, and the Joker's presence is felt throughout the epilogue, as well as in the sequel, The Dark Knight Rises. Essentially, the Joker wins in this regard, and that's scary. He does lose in attempting to have the people in the boats kill each other, which gives the audience a nod of hope in regards to greater human morality. Otherwise, though, the Joker wins in many respects. The Riddler also has many victories throughout the movie, though he ultimately fails in the ending. His greatest failure isn't the lackluster domestic terrorist attack, though. It's when he realizes that Batman isn't on his side in their conversation. It's honestly a great scene. Throughout the movie, the Riddler has been guided by his twisted perception of the world, so it only makes sense that, in his warped view, he believes that he and Batman are teammates throughout the film. All of the little clues aren't just teasers for the audience to find entertaining. The Riddler was leaving clues that would elude the police, but make sense to Batman. Throughout the movie, the Riddler was forced to communicate through riddles and strange websites, for fear of corrupt police officers interfering. When the Riddler realizes that Batman doesn't agree with his ideas, he quite literally has a breakdown. His weakness and vulnerability shine here, revealing just how broken, just how human this antagonist was. It's a great scene and ties a lot of the movie together for me. Special thanks to my brother for pointing that out for me. Again, however, the influence of the Riddler is lost all but physically in the watery epilogue. The movie introduces a clan of henchmen who dress up and believe all the same things the Riddler does at the very end. It's teased somewhat throughout the movie, but I don't think these baddies were given enough treatment to be considered anything more than the sudden arrival of a bunch of punching bags for Batman. I'll give it a bit of a pass, based on how there are indeed actual misguided people like this in existence who fester in internet forums, and an exaggerated version, as presented in The Batman, isn't wholly unwarranted. There's also an interesting angle where Paul Dano's Riddler character perhaps wasn't the murderer in every scene, that he wasn't the sole Riddler at all in the entire movie, but the story doesn't offer much to support this other than that all the Riddler costumes look the same. Overall, the Riddler henchmen aren't great, but perhaps serviceable. The Joker's henchmen do his bidding because of fear and the promise of monetary gains. It's nothing special, but it makes sense within the story. They're always in the background, wearing clown masks, but they never imitate the Joker, or ideologically align themselves with him. As an extension of the Joker's chaotic religion, Harvey Dent could be considered a henchman byproduct, which, in my opinion, fulfills the same function in the epilogue that the Riddler goons did. Only, the fatal consequence of Harvey Dent's visible corruption is way more powerful than the rise of many faceless domestic terrorists. Lastly, we must consider how the two antagonists play off of the two different Batmen in each story. The Riddler, Joker, and Batman all wear a mask. Their masks, their war paint, all mean something to them. That's evident enough. In both movies, Batman is almost always a step behind these two villains, following their intentionally laid out plans until the very end, where they attain some amount of success in achieving their personal goals. Then Batman stops them. The Riddler, as I mentioned before, doesn't act as a direct antagonist to Batman throughout the film, at least in his own idea of how events are progressing. I find this idea to be quite interesting, as it highlights the thematic conceit of the movie, where Batman hears the Riddler goons say, "I am vengeance," in the epilogue. He realizes their similarities. They fight injustice above the law, and are often quite brutal about it, though Batman never kills. Batman is visibly disgusted, moved by the realization that he might be somewhat like the Riddler, which is a really cool idea, and how that realization sparks a transformation into a more heroic figure works very well. It also establishes the story as a good origin story. Even though Batman is 2 years into his Gotham crusade, he still has a lot to learn. Whereas the Riddler destroys without thought of rebuilding, Batman learns that he must help rebuild. There are already enough destructive forces within his city. It should also be mentioned that both were orphans, yet Bruce Wayne was rich and the Riddler was poor, and the Riddler himself points out this economic disparity as a major influence on his character. The Joker is quite different here. He is never in cooperation with Batman, rather, he's appreciative of the feud that exists between them. In a wonderful comment on their eternal rivalry in the comics, the Joker says, "Why would I want to kill you? You complete me." It's haunting and meaningful to the story. As long as Batman doesn't kill, the Joker will continue his own crusade of chaotic destruction. But the Joker also wants Batman to kill him, so that he'd break his own rule, only creating more chaos. The Joker tests Batman and others throughout the movie, attempting to reveal monstrous, self-devouring side. This is his endgame, and though it may seem larger than life at times, as though there could realistically be no real human beneath that smeared face paint and purple jacket, the Joker's character works on every level as an antithesis to Batman, a foil. And then, through Batman, the Joker serves as a challenge to the notion that humanity is innately good. So, was my initial reaction to the movie justified? Does the Riddler feel like a watered-down version of the Dark Knight's Joker? On some levels, perhaps. But then the argument becomes a recursive loop in search of the most base inspiration. It's like saying one rock band stole from another rock band, when all rock bands stole from American Southern blues, which stole from African heritage music. Eventually, we get to some kind of primal inspiration for everything like, I don't know, fire? Well, as we all know, some people just want to watch the world burn. Jokes aside, I have to give the Batman another viewing to formulate a more concrete opinion. As of right now, I think there are enough differences to justify its existence as its own pretty good movie. Sure, there are many similarities between its villain and the villain in The Dark Knight, but there are also many differences, reflective of the differences in their respective Batman protagonists. While I don't think that this rendition of the Riddler will resonate with the audiences as much as Heath Ledger's Joker did, I'm sure some people were leaving the cinema singing a few notes from Ave Maria. Thank you for watching this video. Drop a comment, a thought, a personal anecdote, criticism, anything down below. I want to hear what you guys think, and others will too. Please consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be uploading weekly content about writing, literature, and other items that may acquire my interest. You can find links to my website, where I upload some of my own writing, including scripts of my videos such as this one, additional commentary, short fiction, poems, blog posts, and more. There are also links to my Twitter and Instagram, where you can keep up with daily posts and continue the conversation, as well as a link to my Fiverr page, where I do commission work for writing, editing, and soon, miniature painting. I hope you have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care of yourselves, and do some good in this world.